Welcome to another episode of Tell Me About It with Jakeel. Today we are joined by a special guest, Ariana, aka Ari, aka Dr. President. And today we'll be highlighting just student voices. This is a part of a 5-part series where I will be talking with current undergrad students about their experiences in the classroom, particularly as it pertains to how race, racism, culture all play a part in that academic journey. Just a quick backstory on why I call Ari Dr. President. It's not really a fancy story. It's other than I had a classroom assignment and I needed to come up with an anonymous name so that confidentiality was protected. And so I thought of the two things that I feel like fit her the most, and doctor being one of them, because I'm sure that there's be one day where there would be a doctor tied to her name. And then president, because I feel like she'll be the president of something. I don't know what it's going to be, but she will be the president of something. But that's how Dr. President came about. So Ari, hello, welcome. And just like I do with most guests, please talk about an experience that you have had with none other than me.
Okay, well, basically, I met you when I was a resident at the dorms you were working at as an RC. And I think we clicked pretty well right off the bat, just talking about social justice. I don't even know when that started, honestly. But I will say I know we had good click because I can't remember any other RCs from when I was a resident at right off the top of my head, maybe if I think about it. But obviously you stuck out in my freshman year college experience, and it lasted enough to make me want to be an RA. I brought you to a social justice event as a speaker when I was an RA. Obviously we worked on the Beachside College Council together. So we've worked together a lot. We've talked a billion times about everything in the world, everything that makes us mad. So I think I left high school very passionate about social justice, and I was really concerned of how to keep talking about that or implement that in college, just because I was moving away from home. I didn't know anyone. So I was like, it's probably not a strong thing for me to start off with making friends. But it ended up working out great. And you gave me the room to start having those conversations and keep those conversations and have them in a professional way. I didn't know you could do that. Until I started seeing how you handled yourself as an RC, and I was like, oh, that's allowed. Or kind
of. Yeah, that's I think that's one thing that sticks out is I did meet Ari when she was a resident, an involved resident at that. I didn't have a lot of, I think, residents who I could count on that would actually show up to events for my RAs were putting on. But I knew that Ari and her group of friends, shout out to, the big group, Joseph, Reggie, everybody, all the group. But they showed up to a lot of the events that my RAs would put on and stuff like that. And I appreciate that. And then Ari was a part of a college council. And to this day, I still think that Ari should have probably had a bigger role in college council. But, she wanted to be just a lowly little representative. But I would say that one of the experiences that did stick out to me with Ari is she was probably one of the only residents that I could talk to about social justice issues, mainly because I would say that my level of understanding of social justice issues is a little bit higher than the normal person, I would say, because I'm always reading, I'm always trying to figure out things and stuff like that. And I didn't have a lot of people to talk to about these issues, or at least people who kind of tried to understand them. I think Ari was very open to these conversations, and then also had her own background in social justice and community work. And so we clicked very, very quickly. But I would say a very funny moment, I think, that I can remember being the advisor of college council, and I think they had frustrated me one time, and I literally wrote on the whiteboard, "What the fuck are we
going on?"
I was like, "What the fuck is going on?" Because I think that was the moment they realized that I'm probably not the traditional professional or the traditional advisor, because I really just wanted them to kind of succeed and want them to really communicate as a group and stuff like that. But that's my experiences with Ari. I haven't checked in with her in a long time, and it seems like forever, but I'm glad I'm getting to check in, at least in this space and stuff like that. But again, we will be talking about her student experience and a little bit about my student experience as it relates to these conversations around race, culture, and racism, and just the social climate, especially what it's like now with
Yeah.
everything going on, from the shit show of the election that we just had to the pandemic that we're continuously experiencing and navigating poorly as a country, as well as, you know, the constant threat of police brutality and poor criminal justice system that we do have in this society. And so I want to start by asking, just like, what has your college experience been like in general? Just like, have you enjoyed it? Is there ups and downs? Have you figured out things about yourself? Did you have your aha moment yet? Because you're about to graduate soon. So like, you're almost out of there. So, like, how has it been for you?
I'd say overall I've enjoyed it. I've been very thankful for that. I think the pandemic has shown me just how much I liked it,
Mm,
now that I'm so disconnected from it. But it's definitely had its ups and downs. I've, not to sound super cliche, but I've learned a lot about myself, about others, about my interests. I don't know about an aha moment. Um, not, I'm not 100% sure if that any of those types of moments have come from school or just what's happening while I'm in school, like just all around, or internships type thing.
mm,
Because I feel most myself when I'm working and working in things that I care about.
okay.
Uh, I like my courses and I like my professors and stuff. Um, but I don't know if it's like, I don't know. I have a hard time identifying. I'm super proud to go to Long Beach and I love Long Beach. I just sometimes have a hard time identifying myself as part of Long Beach just because I'm not in any clubs or orgs on the campus. Um, so I identify myself more with like my courses and just being a general student, but sometimes I feel a little disconnected in that way.
Mm,
But yeah, ups and downs. It's a little crazy studying political science and studying international studies at a time like this. Your courses, the coursework that you do, a lot of my assignments are literally to like solve a world problem, solve a problem that global leaders can't solve, but I'll do it in my essay, like polystat 400 or something. um, but yeah, overall, I'd say it's been positive. I think it's just as it's very natural ups and downs. And right now, like I said, it's been a super weird time to be an undergrad. And like I said, specifically what I'm studying, because now I'm being asked. I have 2 more semesters left, and now I'm being asked like, what are you doing next? I don't know what the world is going to need a year from now because it changes so much. Everything changes so much. So it really depends.
mm. Yeah. Well, I think you've touched on some things like the world is forever changing, and it's hard to answer that question more and more, especially now, me being a professor and a high school kind of like educator and talking to my students who are literally applying to college now. It's so hard to tell them, like, explore what you want to do in your life, and then just go for it. Because I'm just like, shit, like, you could be a one major one moment and be like, there's not gonna be a need for it when I graduate. Like,
Yeah, and it's tough, especially because I will say one thing about American college culture that I don't really like. I don't understand. It was really shocking to me when I first got to university. Is people identify as their majors. Like
mm-hmm,
that is all who they are. If you are an engineering student, you consider yourself an engineer.
mm-hmm,
If you study, liberal arts, that's your whole thing. Is like you're an English major. Your whole thing is you're a business major. Personally don't agree with that. And I think that's what kind of traps Americans, when we all know that when you graduate undergrad, there's like a small chance you find a job, right?
mm-hmm.
And it's because we're putting students in these really, really tight little concentrations. And then we're not encouraging, like especially now with the threat of GEs being taken away, we're not the most well-rounded graduates, I don't think. But I also think that people it's so shoved down your throat where it's like, if you have this degree, this is what you have to do. And I think ideally, yeah, but that's not the case. Like, I just think of like my mom's undergraduate degree is in advertising, and she's an auditor now. Like, that's not what she does
Yeah.
at all, you know? And I think that's really common. And I think it's okay if that happens to people. She loves what she does now. Like, I think that's one challenge of being an American college student is that we're so constrained in these little bubbles. And then I also think it makes people not so accountable. Like, a social justice issue will be happening, like the civil rights movement that started this summer, like, or it's been brewing for a while. Biggest civil rights movement the world has ever seen. And you start turning to your peers and you're like, hey, you should probably educate yourself a little more. Or what do you think about what's going on? They're like, I don't know. I'm just like a business major or something like that. You're like, okay. And then as a human, what is your response to this?
Yeah, I think that's one big thing that I've noticed, as well as have been trying to facilitate differently with my students or with the people who I'm around. I've been just like, and my coworkers too, like I'll be like, I know, you teach in the English department and you don't think social justice is something that should be brought up in the classroom or in your curriculum, but like even small steps towards that is like, how about, diversifying the authors, or how about, creating assignments that force them to research some stuff? Because especially when the pandemic happened and everybody moved to Zoom University, everybody was stuck on social media and everybody was stuck on Google. And so it was like, oh, what is police brutality really happening? Google it. Oh, there's thousands of videos. Google it. There's thousands of things. And so many people are so stuck in those bubbles. I've literally had so many conversations with people about like, now you're starting to care about certain social justice issues when they've been issues for a really long time. And the only reason why you care is because you can't go outside. Like, and so there's been all of these things happening where I'm like, so I've been telling y'all that Black people have been dying for a good decade now. And y'all are just like, can you believe that this is happening? Yes, I can. I can believe that it's happening. It's been happening.
And there's like two sides to that card, right? Where it's like frustration of how people could be so naive or so blind or, choosing to ignore. But then there's this other side of the card where it's like, I don't want to applaud a fish for swimming, but I'm thankful that some people are educating themselves now. Like, I'm seeing some improvement. It's like, yes, I'm so grateful you're doing it now. It's really late
Yeah.
to start. So I think that's been a big thing for me recently too, is especially like June, July. I was so mad, like all the time. And you should be. Honestly, I've been mad all of 2020. But like, that was like a really high concentration point of just being so, so mad. And then at the same time trying to be like, okay, if I'm just yelling at everyone, if I'm approaching everyone with anger, that's not going to fix the situation. It's not going to change them. It's not going to change their mind. But also, I have a right to be mad. I think that's been a big challenge for me in 2020, something I'm working on, of like how to approach people about these things that they should have been caring about, like, but at the same time, like, okay, you did it, yay.
Yeah. I have a lot of different I don't want to say resources because I don't want to talk to you like I'm like you're in my like, advising appointment.
No,
But
okay.
I do have like a lot of different like methods, especially because I have embedded myself in this social justice work. And a part of that is understanding that there are people who are going to be late to this whole journey of caring about people. There's going to be some people who just don't want to care. And then you're going to have people who've cared from the beginning. And then within that, you also have more dynamics of that. It's like you have people who care because their identities are the ones that are being attacked. They're the marginalized identities. And then you have the other people who care because they're the privileged identities who can see how their privilege comes into play. So I figured out a couple of methods for dealing with like people who have just started the social justice journey while like also trying to be like, all right, I'm happy for you. Yay, yay, yay. Now keep going. And so
Yeah.
I always ask them the question, and it sounds very extreme. I always ask people when they start the social justice work, are you ready to die? And then they're like, what? And I'm like, are you ready to die for this? And they're just all like, oh no. I'm like, okay, then now I'm gauging your level of engagement with social justice stuff, because I'm ready to die because I'm already getting attacked and stuff. Like, by me not caring about social justice issues and things that are directly impacting my identities, particularly the identity of me being a Black male, like, I can die if I'm not aware. Like, that is a very real
I have the privilege to not care.
like, like
Yeah.
I could literally walk outside and piss off the wrong officer for not listening and be shot. And so I'm telling people, like, you got to gauge your level of engagement. Like, because if you come into social justice circle, like, I just want to help, I just want to learn, I want to do that, and you don't create no boundaries for yourself, you're going to be put into a situation where either you, the person who's trying to educate someone, is like putting in all this mental labor for someone who may not get it at the end of the day, or is going to be the person who's receiving the education being overwhelmed, like, this is too much for me to deal with. And at the end of the day, if you're that person who's being educated with that privilege, you have the opportunity, the right, and you have the ability to literally just shut down and not do anything about it, because your privilege protects you. So a lot of it is like gauging those boundaries, gauging how much work you're willing to do, and then staying within that. Like, oh, no, don't overwhelm yourself. Keep doing what you're doing, right? And get other people like you on board, so it comes to a point where you can start lessening and lessening the amount of energy that is like overwhelming you when it comes to these issues, because then you can slowly embed yourself into social justice work if you truly care. Like, because if you just don't care, if you just want to be like, hey, give me a ally sticker and I want to put my pronouns in my email and now we're good, and it's all like, no, that's not how it works. Like, you can't just say you're an ally and ignore people, right? And that's one of the things, one of the issues that I've really developed over this year. 2020 taught me that I hate the word ally. Like, it's like people use it as this like superhero cape to like prevent other people from like,
Protection, yeah.
like, oh, no, I'm an ally. My Black friend over there knows that I'm an ally. Go ask. And I'm like, I'm not going to ask somebody if you're an ally. I'm not going to tell you you're an ally because you care about people. I'm going to give you a high five and like, now continue calling out your family members, continue calling out your friends, continue doing all these different things. And don't only do it when I'm watching. Like, that's where people get this ally from. They're just like, is he watching? Hey, don't say the N word. And I'm like, oh my God, you're an ally. Thank you. No,
It's
like,
because it had like good intention at the root. I
yeah.
think allyship does have good intentions. I think people who call themselves allies for the most part are trying. I think the only thing is like you said, it's people do treat it like a superhero cape. They do feel untouchable with it. And I think people who call themselves allies can remove a lot of accountability. Because like when I say there's good intention, like obviously, okay, so like I'm not a member of the LGBTQ plus community. I would like to think I'm an ally for the community, but I don't know if I would identify as an ally.
Yeah.
Because it's not an identifier. It's not. And if we're not on this equal playing field, then if I'm like, well, you're gay and I'm an ally, being gay is a whole, it's a sexuality, it's oppressive, like it's something that you will be oppressed for, it's something you have to deal with, it's something extremely challenging, it's more than a label, like, so it's not fair to be like, well, that's your identity and mine is ally. Like, that's not a thing.
Yeah.
That's what sucks about it. Like, I think you're right in that like 2020, I think, has kind of exposed that.
Yeah.
But first of all, it's not enough to just call yourself an ally.
That's the thing. I think that's the big thing is.
And I think it's almost, I don't think people realize it's a way of othering.
Yep.
Like, for example, when you're talking about communities, your community is comprised of every type of person, especially like we obviously both live in California. We're talking about the California standpoint. Well, like right now I am. There's all sorts of people in your community. So when you start talking, yes, there are people in your community within other communities, within the LGBTQ community, the Black community, the Asian community, but you're also part of a larger community. So when you start talking about allyship, it's a big like, they're not with me though, or I'm not with them in their struggle. It's like, okay, like for example, with the Black community, I'm not Black. I will never know what it feels like to be Black. I can only know what I read, what I'm told, what I see. That's it, right? But I wouldn't, it like struggles that affect the Black community, but I should make it my problem too, right? To deal with.
Mhm.
Like, I hope that doesn't come off wrong. It's not to say, oh, I'm struggling in any way. No. But I'm gonna be an empathetic person and be a quote unquote. I guess that's what allies think they're doing when they say they're being an ally, or maybe that's what they're not willing to do, and that's why they call themselves an ally.
Yeah.
But it's not, you can't just say, well, that's a problem for the Black community. I think that's what I'm trying to say. You can't just say, well, that's their problem. You know?
I,
Make it an issue that you confront as well. Make it an issue that you challenge. For example, like, to give background to anyone who doesn't know, anyone who might be watching, I obviously am Caucasian of some sort. So my mom's family is Colombian and Caucasian American, basically. My mom's an immigrant from Colombia, and then my dad is a refugee from Afghanistan. So on my mom's side, I'm 50% white racially because they are white Latinos, and then they are white Americans. And then racially, I guess, depends on who you ask. I could be 100% Caucasian because Middle Eastern people, they're kind of in the middle. I identify more so with Asian. So ethnically, I got a lot going on. Racially, it's confusing, but I have a ton of white privilege and that I am white. And then, part of me is white passing, I guess. So when we talk about, communities and allyship and everything like that, first of all, there's some communities people don't even give me credit for being part of. They don't think I am. But like I said, when we're talking about, like, specifically, when we're talking about BLM and like Black Lives Matter and the idea of the Black community and supporting the Black community, I think that's what it comes down to. Is like actually supporting. And like you said, die for it. Hands down, I would. Hands down, no question. And I think that's a big part of what people don't understand about being an ally. I really think they can donate to BLM. I think they can go to a protest. I think they can go post a Black square on their Instagram.
Mhm.
That's an ally. A lot more to it.
I think you bring up a lot of good things, right?
I'm sorry, ramble.
No, it's good. Where do I start? Okay, so the big thing, right? And this is, for me, this is how I distinguish it, right? Being a Black man, right? Particularly for people who want to support Black communities, right?
Please, no.
I tell them there's a lot of things you have to realize, right? Right. One, support and allyship are two totally different things.
Yeah.
Right? Allyship goes beyond the support that you think you can provide. Allyship goes to the support that they need, that a community needs.
Ask for, right?
Yeah, like I'm coming to you like, we need this type of support from you. I don't need you to go around. I don't need you to be like, I like Black people, like stop cultural appropriating. I don't need you to do that. This is the way that I need support. Right? Sometimes it's financial, sometimes it's not. Sometimes I need you to call out your friends, sometimes I don't, right? And so when it comes to support, that's what support looks like. Support is a constant, like continual act that isn't just based in one avenue that
it's not a one-off.
Like, you don't get to just put you don't get to put a Black square and be like, ally, thank you. Thank you. Everybody's gonna ignore the fact that I had said some racist stuff last week, but I got a Black square. And so you get all of these different things, right? And then it creates more conversations. And I'm just like, when you are a true ally, you are not doing it for the title of ally. Like, if I called you an ally, it shouldn't make you feel like you are now the spokesperson for every outsider who supports the community. And that's what people feel like. They use ally as a defense mechanism when ally shouldn't be a defense mechanism for when people call you out for your toxic behavior. People are allowed to call you out for your toxic behavior. People call me out all the goddamn time, and I welcome it. Like, I know that I have identities that hold some privilege, and because of it, I say shit or I do shit that may be oppressive in nature. And if you're not calling me out, I won't know that I'm doing it, because that's how privilege works. It sometimes blinds you of things, but you have to work towards being more aware of these things. Like, one thing that I really learned was, like, I have a tendency to talk over people. And a lot of that is because I'm a man. And I'm like, no, my voice is supposed to be the most important in the room. And sometimes I have to just shut the hell up. Like, and that's literally what I've learned, is just hey, Jakeel, shut the fuck up and just wait. And then look around, gauge it. I'm gonna talk now. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Right. And so um, that's I think a very important thing that you bring up. And then you bring up being like racially ambiguous, right? And because you clearly and you've stated that you are racially ambiguous, I think that a lot of people probably don't think that you experience certain things that you probably experience, or they probably assume that you experience other things that you have no idea because you've never experienced them.
Yeah.
And so it comes with the territory, because I remember just like back before, like I kind of like knew who you were as like holistically, right? And understanding just like part of your identity, right? It's just your last name, right? Your last name gave me a lot to go off of,
That's
right?
my only indicator. Yeah.
Like, and so it's like if people don't really take into context like who you are as an individual, they're going to say you're white.
Oh, yeah.
Like, there's been a lot of
Yeah.
conversations that I have had with people, like they would try to like, and I don't think I've ever talked to you about this, but like every once in a while when I was talk to like the other housing staff, they would ask me about you. And they're like, do you think she's going to apply? And I'm like, who are you talking about? They're like, the white girl on your college council. And I'll be like, I got one white girl and she's Jewish. Like, so I was like, I don't know who you're talking about. And then they're like, her. And I'm like, oh, Ari's, I guess, white, but like, that's not how I would identify her as, like, if I was to describe her to someone. Like,
And it's fine if you do, it's fine if you don't. Like, I think being ethnically or racially ambiguous, I think your credibility really fluctuates depending on who you're talking to,
yeah.
obviously. Um, so I can't tell you how many people I've met who, and they have every right to do this, specifically people of color. They'll say the first time they met me and they heard me talk about anything social justice-y, their first thought was, why is this white girl talking?
Hmm.
It's fine. Joey told me that. Joey told me the first time I walked into a room, they were like, ugh. And that's fine. I think that's, and I think that happened a couple times as an RA. And these aren't situations in which I was speaking over people of color or anything like that. Literally just my presence in a room.
Yeah.
And that's fine. That's completely fine. Because it's not their fault how they perceive me, and it's not my fault how I'm perceived, just based on how I look and everything. So in that sense, I'm sure my credibility on first impressions can be very confusing for people. I think it's also really annoying for some people that I'm constantly saying what I am.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just so that people understand that I'm not trying to come from any sort of, like white savior or American outsider. Like I use American a lot as a word to describe other people, even though I was born in the US, because I forget I was born in the US because my family wasn't. So we're constantly talking about Americans this, Americans that, Americans this, like we're not. But I think in that sense, like I think there's also times where I'm obviously given way more credibility than I should have because of white privilege, as if my voice matters more in certain situations that it definitely doesn't. So it's a balance though. And I think one thing you talked about when you were talking about people learning, especially times right now, like people learning what they like, how to continuously support, and a big part is that it's continuous. And I really like that you mentioned that it's like what's needed and what's asked for, because I think that's a huge part of community engagement and social justice that people don't realize is you don't look at a problem and think, I'm going to solve it.
Mm-hmm.
Let me go solve it and do it my way. No, ask the community in need. That's something that I learned in a community program I did in high school. And like, I remember we had to watch this TED talk about these Italian scientists who went to Zimbabwe, and they saw these farmers were having a hard time because their tomato crops kept getting eaten and like destroyed. And so the Italian farmer, they kept getting destroyed. And the Italian farmers, their idea was, oh, maybe it's the plants, like the soil. It's not good for these tomatoes. We're gonna change what plants we put here. We'll just give them different crops. They don't need to do tomatoes anymore. Mm-hmm. So they started planting all these seeds, doing this huge community project, or charity project, essentially, and they grew these crops, and again, they were all gone and destroyed. And they assumed it was some sort of bug or something, and they started talking to the locals, which you should have done beforehand. And they found out that hippos were eating all the crops, so it didn't matter what you planted there, hippos were going to eat it. And that was one of those things where they spent a ton of money on this project, on this farming project, and they were convinced that they had saved the people of this rural area of Zimbabwe without ever asking them what they needed. Or, the shoe company Tom's has come under fire for sending shoes to rural communities all over the world, tons and tons and tons of shoes, when that's the last thing they need. They might have a lot of shoes, but they don't have something else. And this is obviously on the international scale, but it's something that like really stuck with me. After learning these lessons, it was like, oh my God, how could I know what someone needs without talking to them? How could I know, if I'm not part of that community, what they need?
Isn't that wild?
And you alluded to that perfectly. And I think that's one thing people really need to keep in mind right now. And another thing is, I feel like there's a quote about it, but I don't remember it correctly, so I'm not going to say a quote. I'll paraphrase a little bit. But right now is a time of learning and a lot of unlearning for people, and specifically people who are interested in moving towards abolition. It's painful. If you're doing it right, it's painful, because you're going to learn that you have a lot of flaws, and you have a lot of things that you've probably been doing that hurt other communities that you don't even realize. Like, you've been approached about speaking over women, and I'm sure that didn't feel good the first time someone told you that. I'm sure
I ignored it, but that's
okay. But when you started to think about it, I'm sure it was a little like, damn, I didn't mean to do that, or like, I hope I didn't upset anyone. We've all had things like that. I'm not going to excuse people who have like weird like Nazi histories. I think that's another thing that's coming up right now, where people are like, oh my God, I used to be extremely racist. Okay, that's not okay anyways. But like microaggressions you might not have known that you were doing, things that you thought were helpful but were actually really destructive, times you've spoken over people or communities. It's going to hurt. If you're moving towards these things and educating yourself properly, it's going to hurt. You're going to have to do a lot of reflection. But if it's hurting, you're doing it right.
I think that's the thing that I tell people too, still, like, I don't necessarily use the word unlearning, just because I think like, it's like, I think what people have to do is they have to realize that they have to beat some of these patterns and thought processes to the point where they have amnesia about them, because it's hard to like unlearn something. It's like, once you learn how to ride a bike, it's not like you're going to forget one day. Like 10 years down the line, you're like, oh, it's still a bike. Like, but it's like, you have to beat yourself into thinking that this bike is no longer functioning the same way. And so when it comes to like these like patterns, these behavior patterns, or people's toxic traits and stuff, it's going to hurt. Like you said, it's going to fucking hurt. Right. And if it doesn't hurt, it means you really aren't doing it right, or that you don't care enough about whatever behavior pattern that you're trying to solve. And so I learned this, like, I'm like, oh, I'm so aware of my toxic behavior patterns as it affects those who are women or those who identify as women. I understand like all of my other privileges being, heterosexual passing and all these different things. And then I'm like, but damn, I don't know shit when it comes to like the like communities, like those who are disabled. Like, I don't know shit. Right. And so it's like educating myself on that, because it's just small things that I didn't realize that I was doing. And like, it's not like people from that community or even people in general will approach me because I guess I'm intimidating. But like, I had to learn, like, damn, like when I'm doing the things that I'm doing, whether that's presentations, videos, poems, and all this stuff, there's a lot of things that I have to consider, like closed captions and all these different things where I had never used to do. And I was like, oh, damn, like I'm not reaching an entire community because I'm being lazy.
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah.
I'm using my privileges in that way, like where I just don't have to. And so I've been trying more and more to like figure out ways where I can try to embed like these things into my day-to-day life, so that I'm not like disenfranchising anyone or like unwillingly or unknowingly using my privilege. But I do also understand that when you are engaged in that work, it's sometimes hard to know gauge it or to understand what your privilege is allowing you to do. And so you just have to be like very cautious and stuff like that. And some people don't want to put in that effort. But all that, to say, shit happens. Like this shit is real. And like the way that we engage in social justice work is really dependent on our effort and like how we view like other communities that we're not a part of and how we can help those communities and support those communities without getting that, white savior mentality of like, I'm just going to put on my superhero cape and swing through and save the whole entire community. And so I've been very fortunate to be able to educate myself to the point where I've been able to educate myself and also have the platforms that I do have to talk to people about these things. And so one thing is like telling people that like if you don't belong in if you're not from a community, right? I'm from the Black community, right? If you're not a part of the Black community, you cannot save the Black community. It is impossible for you to save the Black community. You can support the Black community. You can't change the Black community. Change happens within the people who live in that community. You can support us to help us get to change, but you can't change the community. And that's one thing I've been trying to tell people and reiterate. Like, you can't say like, oh, I helped change this community. No, you didn't. You support. You planted some trees. You took some graffiti off of walls and donated some money. You supported. You can't change a community. Only the people within that community can change that community. Which brings me to my next point. So you touched on being racially ambiguous and stuff like that, and I know that like from my perspective, being someone who's not racially ambiguous, like I walk into a room and people know exactly what the hell I am and who I am. Our education experiences will be drastically different because of it. Again, also, I was an undergrad probably when you were like a freshman in high school, so it was a little different. But how has your classroom experience been just with the identities you hold in regards to race? So what I mean to rephrase, just so that question doesn't seem so convoluted, is have there been moments in the classroom where you talked about race as as a class as a whole? And what was that like coming from your perspective?
I think I'm lucky in that in what I study. Like I mentioned, I'm an international studies major and a political science major. Social issues, race, gender, sexuality, it comes up a lot in my classes. So that's pretty regular discourse, which I wish it was in more departments and universities. I don't know why it's not constantly talked about, like literally at all times. But I feel like I have a variety of experiences within my departments, and I think within Long Beach State in general. First of all, like for example, there's not a lot of Black students when you look at how Black Long Beach is, and then comparison to CSU Long Beach, the math isn't mathing, it does not make sense. So it's not uncommon for me to have a class with no Black people, one or two Black people. And what happens is obviously when we talk about race specifically in the United States, it's most often talked about like there are two races in the US and almost nothing else. And you get used to that. But when those conversations are happening and then there's no Black people in the room, there are times where people can definitely feel comfortable overstepping, or even if there are Black people in the room or whatever, if they look around and see like a white majority, or they think they see a white majority, people can cross the line. I think with my professors and stuff, I don't think I've had many problematic professors when it comes to race, but that's from my perspective. Yeah. But students, yes, very problematic students in my courses. Everyone knows the stereotype of a white political science male. Yeah, it's true, but it's not just white men. It's like all poli-sci men. But I think in that sense, I think when we talk about me being racially ambiguous, time and time again in my life, people have thought they're in a safe space to be extremely offensive because they think, well, she's a white girl, I'm a white guy, or I'm this and she's this. So they say what's really on their mind. People show their true colors to me pretty often, which I guess is a blessing and a curse. I'd rather know your true colors
Yeah.
Oh, I know if you're a piece of shit, you know?
Yeah, that does.
But it does put me in a situation pretty often where it's like, wait, what did you just say? Oh, yeah, no, we're not doing that. You know? And I think that gives me, I think I am in general kind of confrontational person, but I think people then get this like really heightened idea of that of me, or think, oh my God, she's like a social justice warrior, like, she's woke or whatever. Ugh. Like just, as if like I'm policing people for their language. No, or like PC police. No, none of that. None of that. But like there is an etiquette and there is a way obviously that you should treat people. And like I'm obviously not, you want me to just sit there when you're being racist or like problematic. I'm not gonna do that. So I think in the classroom in that way, I've had to be a lot of times the person who's like, is no one else in the class gonna say anything about that, about what that person just said? But I think also it's my privilege that lets me do that. Obviously, if I was a Black woman speaking the way I did, I'd be painted as angry constantly, right? Like constantly.
Very
So
true.
obviously I have the room to, even if I am angry, I have the room to come off that way and I won't be penalized. Like, I won't, obviously, we worked in the same housing department. I think that I was able to say a lot more than my Black counterparts.
Yeah.
Even if I was saying the exact same things as them,
Mm-hmm.
one of them might get fired, whereas I wouldn't. We saw that happen.
That is what happened. So
Literally what happened.
yeah.
And that's obviously a privilege of mine, but it's also just one of those things of, it still shocks me when people do that. When people look at me and think, I'm going to say something super racist and she's going to agree with me, which really scares me about what happens in all white circles.
Yeah.
Uh, but I think as far as race, in my academic experience, like I've mentioned, my race does not hold me back in any way. In education, being Caucasian and being, I guess, Asian, kind of. Obviously, when we talk about like Asian privilege in education, that's usually East Asian, and I am not that. But um, in that sense, I've never been held back educationally. I've never had a lack of access to resources. I've never been, professors have never assumed that I was not smart. If they have, it's been on the grounds of me being a woman, but
Yeah.
not my race. But yeah, as far as like what that does for me in the classroom, it's just become a thing of, okay, when someone's being problematic, I'm going to speak up. I have the privilege to speak up. Not a circumstance of where I'm speaking over anyone. I will only speak up if no one else is speaking. But I also think it's interesting because Long Beach is a Hispanic serving institution, and I'm Latina. But I will say that it's a Hispanic serving institution, and I would, if anything, it's very Mexican centric. That makes sense for Long Beach. That makes sense for Southern California. It's a Mexican population, so I'm not Mexican, so there's not a lot of relatability there. But I think that's one of the most interesting things also about experiencing racism at Long Beach. It's one of those, I, once again, do not experience it. I just see it happening pretty often. I hope people are learning too that not just white people are racist. I'm not trying to paint a broad brush about Latinos or Mexicans or anything like that. But you do see anti-Black racism from the Latin community often. You see anti-Black racism from the Asian community. You see anti-Latin or Latinx or Latin racism from everyone. It's just, it works around. Obviously, you can't be racist to white people, but everyone else is pretty racist to each other pretty regularly. And I think unless you're in a setting where you see a lot of people in color, like where there's a majority people of color, I think some people forget that. They think that it's like, oh, it's just white people who are racist. Like, no, I can call out anyone in the classroom who's being racist, and I think anything for like professors to do better on that. It sucks that professors won't allow it, but they also wait for other students to call each other out. I think that's a little weird sometimes. I understand it's to hold your peers accountable, but I will say that has frustrated me time and time again. I've had to talk to professors about that. If you're going to be like the moderator of this discussion or the authority in this space, like supposed authority, act like it. But yeah, I don't want to speak too long about like race and its impact on me because
Yeah.
I have a ton of privilege there.
Yeah. No, but I think that's important too, because I think, it's important for people to hear that as well. Like you can be someone who has not been impacted like in terms of like negatively by their race in the classroom, but still notice like how race in the classroom is impacting other people.
Yeah, and you can obviously you can see it. You can see it when it's happening. Like I don't know when people who don't really think racism is a thing or that institutional racism doesn't exist. I personally don't. I have a really hard time understanding where people are coming from when they say that, just because you can see it.
Yeah,
You can physically see it happening sometimes.
very
Um,
obvious.
but maybe that's just people being naive. I'm not sure.
I think it's a combination of things, right? And so I'll touch on two things that you've mentioned, right? From the professor standpoint, right?
Yeah.
For me, because of my identities and stuff like that, I make it kind of my obligation to facilitate that kind of space because I understand what it's like to be the student in that situation and be like, so nobody else is.
No one's gonna stick up for me.
Uh, so y'all didn't hear that, right? And so like I mentioned it in like I think one of the first podcast episodes that I had, and it's like I had a professor who like would microaggress students and stuff like that, or students will microaggress each other, and professors would just watch and be like, if the student doesn't bring it up to me, I'm not gonna facilitate that. And it's like no, like as a professor and as educators, we have to make it our like if we are going to be facilitating this space to make sure that students all feel supported, that students are all learning, that there's always teachable moments and mistakes and stuff, we have to be willing to jump into every single situation, even the ones that we are uncomfortable addressing. Because I can tell you now, if there's an issue of race in the classroom, easy. Let's talk about this. I don't give a fuck what I was talking about. Let's talk about this situation right here. But if there's a situation that happens around like gender and stuff like that, I'm less likely or less comfortable just because I don't want my privilege in that space to be dominating. So I understand that there's some hesitancy, but there shouldn't be to the point where you don't address it as a faculty, staff, educator. And then being the student, right? I think that right, I can commend you on feeling that it's partly a part of your responsibility to say some shit, right? Especially knowing that you do have the privilege to not say anything and nothing would happen to you.
Yeah.
For me, in my undergrad, there wasn't a lot of conversations revolving around race at first. I went to Humboldt State, so really
Oh,
white, really white, very liberal, but also very like all lives mattery. And so like,
it's white liberals.
oh, it's super white liberals who consider themselves hippies and consider themselves all these other different things that I fail to understand. But I remember I started going to Humboldt State around the first kind of big national thing that happened was Trayvon Martin, right?
Yeah.
And I remember having conversations with students and all these different things about it. And most people that I had conversations with were like, yeah, this is very unfortunate, racism, all that stuff. Then Mike Brown happened. People were very different in that space. It was that's where I started to see the whole all lives matter, Black Lives Matter divide.
That was the first time. I remember exactly when that started. I remember where I was. Like I remember the first conversation I had about it because it was a shift, right? It was
literally, it went from like racism exists and this shouldn't happen to like, no, police are trying to do their job.
sometimes it's okay.
Yeah.
I
Oof.
was in Texas for Thanksgiving break. I remember when that happened, when Ferguson started going off.
Yeah.
And I remember I went to the dinner table with my family and I read on the news 580, because I'm in the Bay Area, 580 is the freeway here, was shut down because protesters were going to walk on it.
Mm-hmm.
I remember my family immediately being like, shutting down a freeway? No, bad. Good cause, bad idea.
Yeah.
And that was the first time that I was like, oh no, like people really care about themselves more.
Yeah.
And it's not even like I'm can't relate to people who are like, I have racist family members. My family's so racist, but I'm not. can't relate. But like, I think that in itself was like a microaggression that I was like, okay, do you really think this freeway can't stop for a couple hours?
Yeah.
Because someone was shot like dozens of times. And I think that's the first time that I started realizing like even that is a form of microaggression, and like how people respond to protests, I think is a big flag of like what they are.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like you said, I remember the exact moment that split, and I was in high school when that happened.
See.
You even saw it at the high school level.
Yeah.
We were kids arguing with each other about this.
Yeah.
It was wild.
And it was to the point where like it was so weird for me because I was already losing a part of my identity being in that white space for so long. And so I found myself confused a lot of the times being like, damn, like these are people who I've had conversations with and who understand racism like happens and understand that people should all be treated with respect and all that stuff. But they're also on the other side of like, well, why did he run? Or was he committing a crime and all these different things? And I found that divide and started to really realize that. And so I thought, oh, this is going to be conversations in the classroom for sure. But it wasn't conversations in the classroom. There was campus-wide conversations that were held by BSU and other Black organizations, but I never had a teacher go, so like these things are happening around the world. How do people feel about it? Nothing, never. And so that wasn't even remotely a conversation, but I know that like when we're talking about like social justice issues and those happening in the classroom, the one time in my undergrad that I know that we talked about social justice a little bit, I took a psychology of women class, and the first day, one of the dudes out of the 5 dudes that were in there, it was like 100 people in there. One of the dudes was all like, why isn't there a psych of men class? And then I remember for about 45 minutes, everybody kind of just had a discussion about like how privileged men are. And I was just like, why would you say that in this space? Like, out of all spaces, you're gonna look around the room, gauge it. Like, even if you are just like ignorant and don't understand that, I was like, why would there need to be any class centered around men when everything is centered around men? It's just like saying like, why would we have a class around white history when like everything is white history?
That is history. Yeah, that's the history we're done.
Like, and so like, so for me, like undergrad, like there was none of those conversations in the class. Now, when I was in community college, yes, we had those conversations, but I think it was different because there was an expectation already that everybody was older. It was like, oh, we're older, we can have these mature conversations. And then when I went to Humboldt, I was having class with like 18 and 19-year-olds who were from like very privileged backgrounds and were like, oh, I couldn't get into Santa Cruz, so I went to Humboldt, which was pretty much the same. And I would bring up these conversations with them in the classes that and I was a psych major, and they would just be like, what? This is happening in the world? And I'd be like, why aren't we talking about these things in the class? And so like, I'm glad to hear that at least you have these conversations in your classes. Now, to say that they go well or not, that's not,
they have like room to grow, So like I said, I heard BLM for the first time I want to say that was 2015, if not it was 2014. So I was in my sophomore, junior year of high school. And I'm from the Bay Area, extremely liberal place, very diverse place. So my high school's response, like immediately, was the BSU started doing a weekly die-in, we're all Black, go lay in the quad for lunch every week. Like that, this was the space I was in. So for me, I was like, this is super normal. History professors would talk about that thing. It was mostly focused on the history professors. But I remember when Freddie Gray died, my Spanish professor or teacher, she was like, okay, this is what class is gonna be about today. We're gonna talk about Freddie Gray. Like I think it was a great space to be in at the time. And so when I did come to Long Beach, I was a little surprised at first. It seems like I think with the GEs, professors like to play it more safe. And I've had many professors admit openly that they will not share personal ideas in the classroom because they are afraid of being recorded. Even if they have what I think are great ideas, it sucks. It really sucks that they are afraid of being canceled, fired, whatever.
Yeah. Very real possibility.
So I remember at first I was like, "Oh, I thought they were going to be more open in college," like because in some ways they were. They were like cursing and didn't really care about things, and I was like, "Whoa, that's awesome." But then in some ways they were a step back for me in my experience. I was like, "Oh, you guys don't talk about these things." But as I started to go further in my majors, those conversations were happening, and it was great. But I think there's still obviously a way to go. Like I remember it was really great. This political theory class I took last semester, so starting in January of this year, um, the professor ended up being a total anarchist, and I loved it. I had an assumption of anarchist, like being an anarchist. I had a perception in my head of like set everything on fire and like no rules, but that's not what it is at all. Like reading anarchist theory is incredible. It's incredible. Um, but anyway, so I remember one day he decided to start the class by posing the question, are police good or bad? Do we need them? Do we need rules and do we need police? Because it was a theory class, so obviously you have to ponder these things. And I remember saying in like January or February, I remember because there was like a mutiny in the class when I said it. I said I don't think there should be police. I said they should be abolished. And I said I know that I am privileged in that I grew up in a place where, well, first of all, my town is unincorporated, so there are no police. There's a sheriff's department, and there are only sheriffs, but there are no police. They are county sheriffs. Um, so their presence is primarily highway patrol, and then some sheriffs, and then my high school had a police department and a police presence. So I know that I grew up privileged in a way that they weren't a constant thing in my life. Not really. Like yes, I saw them every day, but their presence in this town is known for like highway patrol type stuff or catching kids smoking weed. That's about it. A lot of car chases from Oakland end in my town. I don't know why. It's just the place where they like to get off the freeway that start in Oakland. So that's their main function. So I tried to say, I know I'm very privileged in thinking that, my life personally wouldn't be all that much different.
Yeah.
If the police were abolished. But I started to get into it too, of the obvious things that have become the discourse now. Like I wish I could meet with that class now and be like, what do you guys think now? Because I remember they were furious. This class had one Black student, bunch of white and Latino students. I think I was the only Asian student, and a white male professor. The professor was the only person who agreed with me. Everyone else, furious. And it was so interesting because, like I said, look where we are now. Police abolition is actually like something people are allowed to talk about now. But that's one of those things where I was like, I thought we were a little further than we are. But as soon as we said that, I had like a reality check of, oh, even these people who are saying Black Lives Matter, even these people who are saying fuck the police, these people who are about it, no. Because the first time they're confronted with the idea of what if there was none? And it's not that police abolition doesn't equate no justice, it doesn't equate no safety, no protection, it doesn't equate that. I think people, obviously their first thought is, wait, what? Now what? But the very first time I think that people had to think about that, I remember being like, whoa, first of all, you guys haven't thought about this before. You guys still like them, especially because the few times I've ever had to call the police in my life, thank God it's been very few times, they didn't bring any help. Yep. Nothing helped. The circumstance didn't change. I'm lucky in that obviously it didn't change, that it didn't end fatally or anything, but there was nothing added to the situation. Nothing helped. So that's one of those things of like, yes, I think undergrad discussions right now, especially in the liberal arts college at least, they are centered around race. There's a lot of good talks happening, but I also think there are some not so great talks happening. And I also think there are a lot of professors speaking on things they shouldn't be. A lot of professors being comfortable talking about experiences or communities that they don't belong to. So maybe there's some improvement, but I also obviously can't speak on Humboldt. Like that's a very different community.
Yeah, I think with Humboldt is a very, I would say it's a protected in the sense that like they have a very diverse faculty pool. But I would also say that like they also have a history of doing some shady shit too. Um, when I was going to Humboldt, a huge focus was on our native populations because there are a lot of indigenous people there. And I remember a particular person was fired, and if you Google it, she got a pretty large sum of money because of being fired because of her identities and things. So like there's definitely some issues. Shout out to her for winning some money, but like, she was the only, staff member out here supporting native populations and stuff. But that to say, you know, to backtrack to like some of the things that you said, right? That is one of the things that professors really do have to understand, and that's a big fear, right? Because I didn't understand it until I became on this side, right? I was
Yeah.
like, oh, it is a big fear for some people that they're going to lose their job for voicing their opinions. Like,
And
again,
it is a real risk.
yeah,
It's not,
it's
some
scary.
like, yeah, crazy fear to have. Like,
I'm like, oh shit, like y'all for real scared. And
mhm.
I think that's the difference with staff of color, particularly faculty of color. Our lives are risked every day we come
Yeah,
to work. So like
exactly.
I don't necessarily have that like fear of like, fuck it, I'm gonna say it. Like
Mhm.
as long as I don't say the N-word, right? I think I'm solid. Like,
Well, and when I said at the beginning that you were the first time I saw someone speak about race and social justice type issues in a professional space.
yeah,
That's why. Because you were obviously, it's not like you cannot talk about it.
yeah, it's
It
impossible.
these issues affect you every single day. But I remember when you did, I was like, "Wait, what? You're allowed to talk about that?" Especially because, like, teachers in high school, yes, they would talk about BLM and stuff sometimes, but they still had to be very careful, and
Mhm.
they wouldn't talk about many other issues, you know? And again, tiptoeing, walking very carefully around what they say. And I had this idea of the workplace. I had worked at a government office before I worked in housing, and it was just I wasn't told that explicitly, but it was just assumed. I was the only intern there, and everyone else was much older than me. They never talked about politics. They never talked about social issues. Nope. um, and I think that's a big thing. I think that's a really big thing. And I really like what you're saying here, like where you're going with this, because obviously, professors of color, staff of color, administrators of color,
Every day is like
how could you not?
you're fired. Like I and it's the same thing with housing. I did a really good job of like masking a lot of the things that I was experiencing while I worked there. And I'm sure you've probably heard a lot of things that I experienced when I was in RC, but like every day was like every time I opened my mouth, I knew another conversation was going to be had somewhere with professionals about like, is he okay to say that? It's like I'm like, why not? It's not problematic. I'm not telling them this is what I
Culture
believe.
there too. 'Cause I don't know how housing culture was before you came in.
Oh, it was
Um,
what it was when
and
I changed
obviously
that.
and it obviously wasn't all down to you. There was other people involved, other people, right up there with you. But I think I have to thank you for that, especially because, housing was really crazy that year that I came in.
Mm-hmm,
A lot happened. A lot of really unfair things took place.
mm-hmm,
And I used your name pretty often when things were going out of line. I'd be like,
mm-hmm.
mm, okay, I know Jakeel started this conversation last year and I'm going to keep it going now. And this would happen at all staffs and things like that. So I
Oh,
appreciate you doing that.
oh, I got a lot of text messages. Trust me, I got a lot. I got a lot of. Ooh, Jakeel, can you believe? I'm like, hey, I don't work there no more.
Well, and I mean, they've made social justice a big part of their training, at least big-ish, a big part of their messaging, supposedly what they care about. So I mean, obviously some work was done there, and some of it they decided to go the complete opposite direction of exactly what they were told to do. Um, so I do have to thank you for that. And I think moving forward in professional spaces, because I've obviously worked places since housing,
yeah,
um, it's cool to carry that to other places. And I think housing is the only place I've worked that's been like an absolute, if I really don't care about Long Beach housing, an absolute shit show. That's the only place I've worked where it's been like extremely problematic to work there, constantly being devalued as a worker. Um, but so I haven't had to take it to such extremes at my other jobs. but I've been thankful that I've been able to have these conversations at other places. I did intern with my member of Congress right after I worked in housing, and it was really cool to feel comfortable in a place very professional like that, very like a federal workspace, and bring some of those conversations with me. It obviously didn't have the it's not like housing where you just have the time to have these like staff meetings where you talk about everything. Like, no, there's no time for that. But to implement these things, and I don't know what to call it because okay, it's racism, but it doesn't have to do with race. The most discrimination I face is when people are talking about Middle Eastern people and Muslims and Afghans. That's a big part of my identity. That's where people get the most problematic around me. And because of these conversations that you started in housing and conversations we've had together, I've been able to I've always been able to stick up for myself, but probably a little bit better. And again, more professionally with things like that. Because I think it's obviously we're a very small minority in the United States, this part of the world in general. So I think it's kind of brushed over. In that sense, I think I've faced some like discrimination light again because I'm white, but in that and because people don't look at me and think, oh, she's Muslim.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do have to thank you for
that. Because I know we've had we've had conversations about certain people, in in housing or college council particularly, who have said things, and we've had those conversations before. And I mean, that's all. I think that's a big part of why I still work in education. And while I don't work in housing anymore, but I think that was like a big part of like my purpose there. And I know you didn't get to kind of experience what it was like as me as an RC and things like that, other than college council. But I know that and not to sound narcissistic or anything like that, but I am going to toot my own horn. I did have a strong impact on housing at Long Beach because I wasn't like a lot of previous RCs before. And I loved my RC group that I had with me. Shout out to all of them. Some of them are still my closest friends. I loved the ACs that I had, Juan and Melinda. They were amazing, and allowed me the space to do a lot of the things that I do, even though I know they got shit for it. And I know that there was probably a conversation about firing me on a regular basis, but that's whatever. And I know that my whole goal is if we are housing professionals, and this is going to tie into my next point. We are housing professionals, whether you're an RA, whether you're an RC, whether you're an AC, whether you're above. We're housing professionals. We get way more training than police officers get in terms of dealing with situations.
Yes, I remember thinking that during RA training. I was like, I am extremely well trained in de-escalation. I am confident that there are so many scenarios I could handle over a police officer, whether that's something as wild as a school shooting, something as wild as you are suicide prevention trained. And we see circumstances in which that has happened in housing where university police has been right there and a root of the problem, with drug issues or with drug use, all of these things. I think that's a great point. And I think, if anything, the training in housing, because, for example, when you're going to be an RA, they train you for like 2 weeks, a couple weeks. That may sound like a lot, but it's not. And you learn so much in that short period of time. Imagine if everyone in communities was being trained like that, how much we could get done, how much healthier people there would be, especially in better training than what we've received. I think that's a huge part of the educating we're doing right now. It's not just reading theory. It's not just how to listen to people. It's how to do. I think it's a big part of what's going on right now. I'm despite everything that happened in housing, I'm so thankful for specifically the restorative justice type style things I learned in housing and de-escalation things I learned in housing.
I would say housing did teach me a lot. I would go back to a housing job under the right circumstances.
Yeah.
I mean, I was just in a housing job literally last semester. So it's not like housing is something that I hate, right?
Yeah.
I hate some parts of housing, especially the politics of housing and stuff like that. But I do cherish being able to support students, especially in that pivotal moment. This is housing. People, that's home security right there. right? And so being able to support students and make sure that they don't get kicked out and all these different things, make sure that whatever behavior that they're doing, the growth, all that good stuff. But all the training that I went through in housing and stuff like that, I think really benefited me. The biggest thing that I always tell people, and it's always a surprise to people, when I worked at Long Beach, I didn't have any training. Zero.
Ah,
Zero. I went to no RC training because my paperwork was all messed up.
I don't think my RC did either when I was an RC.
But like zero training.
Yeah.
And people never understood that. And I would tell them, like, I'm dealing with all these situations, being on call, not being on call, helping students, and I had no training.
Mm-hmm.
So like understanding that impact now, and then now the training that I was able to provide, right? I think we brought a layer of social justice training to like the recruitment process for RAs and stuff like that. And so like we were like, like it's great that we get to train our RAs and stuff, but like what about the people who want to be RAs? And not everybody's going to get it, but they're going to get some type of workshop out of it. They're going to get some type of,
Yeah.
and I think that's really important to note. So yes, that's important. And so to go all the way back to your point, right? Because that's just how conversations work with Jakeel. I just connect everything. Back to the point about police abolition, right? I think that like a lot of people are very confused about what that looks like and what that means is because they've never thought about it, like you mentioned, but it's also because people have been socialized and taught to like hold police officers to such a high regard that they're not capable of making mistakes, or they're not capable of being racist or capable of being discriminatory. But we can say the same thing about teachers. Like you can say teachers are racist, but you can't say that police officers are. Our job titles are drastically different, but we still control people's path and people's growth and people's
And they have a gun.
and so like, and it's the whole, I think it's so interesting because the same conversation with defund the police. So many people are, I've had so many arguments and stuff, and this is a drastically different topic, and we could talk about that for hours and hours about defund the police. But I've had so many conversations with people saying like, look at what what LAPD and is doing now. They have to get rid of their sexual assault crimes division, and I'm like, you need to understand. This is what I tell people. Defund the police is exactly what it sounds like. Limit funding.
It's exactly what it says it is.
Limit funding to certain areas that don't need that funding. More weapons. Put that funding towards something else. Yep. And the other thing when it comes to defunding the police, when you get rid of a budget, right, it's up to that department to figure out how to use that budget. So if they cut sexual crimes, that's that police department not prioritizing sexual crimes, not as a result of the money being gone. You can reallocate. So they think that having better guns is more important than analysis for sexual crimes that they don't even deal with properly anyways, because DNA sucks, because they don't know how to talk to people who are victims of sexual assault.
They don't care.
They don't believe people and stuff like that. And unfortunately, women are like negatively impacted more than men. And we all know that both gender identities and across the gender spectrum, sexual assault happens, but we also understand that women have a elevated sense of fear regarding these things, because if that wasn't the case, there wouldn't be so many weapons and AKA self-defense items created specifically for women. So that's just a whole nother tangent. But I think, you brought up a lot of good shit in this conversation. And so I think that one of the things that I do want to leave our lovely listeners on is just like, what recommendations do you have for just schools or professors? You choose which way you want to go with that, and just supporting students of color a little bit in their academic journeys. And if you need time to think about that, I can talk about what my recommendations are.
Yeah, maybe you get started.
Okay. So for me, I think one of the biggest things, and this is me coming from the perspective as a former student, I can say that now, and as a current educator, is like, not every faculty member cares, and understanding that, and institutions don't do a good job in hiring faculty members who care about other people. And so,
or encouraging that.
Yeah. And so I got three big recommendations. One being, we have to embed like social issues, social justice into curriculum that's not just in the sociology departments, the political science departments. All right, it has to be embedded into every single GE, every single major, because everybody's going to deal with people in their lives. That's like one of the biggest recommendations that I have. Another one I think is the way that we deal with like situations is always reactive. Institutions are always waiting for shit to happen in order to respond. So they're always all like, oh, we got abortion people on campus. Now we'll react, instead of being proactive about it and being like, so we have these things put in place, right, for situations to deal with. And we have these people to contact. We have all these different things to deal with these issues, right? Because we know that there is a population of people who are going to be upset about it and a population of people who support it. So we have to facilitate that conversation in a positive way instead of reacting to the people who are upset about it or reacting to the people who aren't upset about it. We have to be able to facilitate that. And then my last recommendation is literally alludes to that first point. Diversify your goddamn hiring practices, because there should be no reason why there aren't Black faculty, brown faculty, why there aren't more faculty in different departments. I get so thrown off when I go to like a school or go to like a job, or when I do consulting work for institutions and stuff, and I ask them about their faculty dynamics, and they're like, oh, we got one Black person in English, we got one Black person in history, but he doesn't teach African American history, somebody else does. And I'm just like, what the hell? How does this even make sense to you all?
Mm-hmm.
If you diversify your hiring practices, and that's not saying to tokenize people and just be like, oh,
No,
you're a Black engineer, hire them. It's like, no, like you have to provide opportunities and broadcast like these opportunities for everyone. So you know that there's initiatives taken on institutions to make sure that there's like more women in STEM, more Black people in STEM, more Black people in these departments that aren't typically sociology, psychology, and your basic stuff. So you diversify that by providing opportunities and stuff like that. And when you see representation, right, we know that if I'm a Black faculty member and I got Black people in my class, they're comfortable. They're like, oh shit, I could be a faculty one day. And
yeah.
that's important. I think those are my 3 recommendations. It's like doing those things won't solve your institutional racism problem, but it will help students feel more supported on campus to navigate institutional fucking racism,
Mm-hmm.
or provide them with a space to deal with it. But there's a lot of recommendations. I say we just burn down schools in general and just start teaching people out of the backyards of our houses, but that's just me.
I think there's a lot to what you said, and I think, you know, diversification is a huge part of that. Not only at the hiring level, because that part is crucial. Diversification of curriculum, and honestly, diversification of admissions.
That's big.
It's so unfortunate that affirmative action failed on the ballot last month.
Woo! I was like, what? Who's opposing this shit?
By a lot. That was extremely disappointing. That was like one of the biggest hits from election night that I was like, I thought better of everyone. But because if you have a more diverse student body, more happens, more conversations happen, more gets done. You have higher achievement. Like, I don't know what's stopping these institutions. I don't know why they can't implement it themselves. It's totally fine for the CSUs to decide that we are going to implement affirmative action, but no, we'll just, the state tells us. Exactly. I think that's a huge part of it. I will say, as far as like diversification, I'm taking a Middle Eastern studies class for the first time this semester, and it's taught by a Middle Eastern professor, and like the joy that brings me every single day. I think that's my first time having a Middle Eastern educator at all. That's but not only is he extremely intelligent, but like it feels so good to be able to talk about like us, like, and it's an us, it's not a they, because especially as a Middle Eastern person, we are always a they in the United States. It feels so good to be an us, and I can only imagine how that feels often. I still get excited, even though apparently the majority of teachers are women or professors. Lately I've been having way more male professors. It still feels good when a woman is teaching me. I had very few Latina educators, but when I've had them, it's been a great time. And like obviously these people are intelligent, like you said, they're not tokens at all. Yeah. But it feels really good when you do have someone, especially in like, I think in focus studies, I really think it's like pretty inappropriate to have, like, I would have been upset if my Middle Eastern studies professor was not Middle Eastern.
Mm.
That's something that I struggle with a lot in political science, honestly. Um, if that's where I face it, if I face any discrimination in education, it's professors who've researched Latin America or researched Middle East and maybe even lived there and decided that they know more than me. And maybe they do in some regards. I've never lived in the Middle East, so maybe they have more experience in that regard. But at the end of the day, don't ever tell me how I feel.
Yep,
That
that's
happens
the
pretty
big thing.
often. It's
You can
pretty
do
damn
all the
often.
research. Yeah, people can do all the research they want, but
At the end of the day, you're not it. Like,
you
and
just
it's not to say you
not
can't
it.
study communities you're not a part of. That's fine. You can go conduct your research anywhere in the world. Just be mindful, I think. I think another thing that helps universities or something that I'm thankful that happens is people within communities doing, incentivizing and doing outreach and representation, like I'm kind of alluding here, matters a lot.
Mm,
Like something I know that a lot of the Black organizations on our campus do, specifically the Black fraternities and sororities, is they'll go to like high schools, middle schools, in the Long Beach area and try to get them like committed to going to college one day.
mhm.
Like, and we're gonna make this path and we're gonna make it fun for you and we're gonna make this like a big goal for you. I think that's a big part of what needs to continue to happen, and it shouldn't have to come down to these orgs choosing to do this. Um, and then I think another thing is that makes a big difference that I think professors are really afraid to do because it might be controversial. But every professor or teacher that I've had who's done this has ended up being one of my favorites. If you start your class, first of all, maybe by doing a check in with how everyone's doing, but also talking about current events. I
Mhm.
think teachers and professors who are not like history teachers, not sociology teachers, or professors, they think they don't have to, or that it's a waste of class time. Almost always you can apply that to something in the curriculum or something in the coursework. But if you start your day by talking about what's going on in the world, because guaranteed your students have opinions on it and have thoughts about it. And the amount of times, I'm sure you can relate, the amount of times you've walked into the classroom and been like, why am I supposed to focus on this today? Like earlier this semester, I was having a really hard time because I'm in the Bay Area and we were on fire and the sky was red. And I was sitting in class like, why am I learning about China's economic policy right now? Like, yes, that's a big deal, but I do not care right now that I can't breathe. Like,
Yeah.
and I think if I had one professor who asked, do any of you live in the Bay Area? Are you guys okay? And I was like, because you asked, I'm okay. I'm fine now. And that made all the difference for me, all the difference. And that was the only coursework I did that day because I felt super neglected by my other professors. Didn't. Or, these professors with the pandemic who continuously ask, how's everyone doing? Are you safe? Are you healthy?
Yeah.
They stand out more. I think that's something that will actually make a positive impact in education, especially because then, for example, when I was protesting this summer, that was another time where I did not want to be focusing on my finals. I
Yeah.
was a little busy. Um, that that helps.
Yeah.
I think that helps, even if it's a small impact, even if it feels like a time waster, even if it sometimes brings up challenging conversations. Those conversations are important to have.
They are. I think they are. It's hard to. They're just fucking important. I think that's one of the things that I do as an educator is just no matter if things are going on in the world or not, it's just checking in with my students. It's like I know they got lives that are drastically different than mine. They may have trauma and all these different experiences that they have, and so it's just literally I'm like, how you living? And they're just all like, not great. And I'm like, all right, well, let's focus on that and not focus on this 10-page paper that I'm about to assign your ass. So it's like,
And I feel like students perform better when you do that.
oh yeah, absolutely. They're always all like, look, like I'd rather my student, not do an assignment for a reason that they had to work on something like themselves or their living situation. And be like, you know what, turn it in whenever you can. And if you don't get to be able to turn it in, just turn in what you have and I'll grade it with a grain of salt. And then also just I think being available and honest and telling students like, you feel that shit, I feel that shit too. Like when
Yes,
people
and
like,
conveying your own emotions. I think professors think that they can't. Please bring that forward. Please, like, make that a trend or whatever, because the professors make all the difference when they're honest, when they're like, "Hey, I'm really scared right now too." First of all, that's validation. Second of all, it's like, "Okay, we addressed we're all scared or we're all safe. Now let's focus on the lecture."
Yeah,
That helps so much.
it really does. I think that that's really important. And you all heard it here. Ari said, "Stop being robots" to all the faculty members in the world. No emotions and talk about your experiences. But to not make this a 5 hour podcast episode,
I'm sorry.
no, it's completely okay. I enjoy these conversations. I really do. But is there any lasting things you would like the people to know, whether that's Instagram stuff, whether that's life stuff, whether that's get involved, whatever, anything you want the people to know?
Wear your mask, please. Stay home if you can, if you have the privilege to.
Mhm.
If you have the funds, please donate to your local food bank. It's really tough times right now. You can find me on socials at Ariana Feisy on most things. But yeah.
Cool. I'll put that information into the description. I'll probably forget, so I'll probably have to ask you. But uh,
Fine.
but this has been another episode of Tell Me About It with Jakeel. Tune in for the next time. Bye, people.